For 14 years, Judge Richard Chiavarella walked into that courthouse every single morning like a man who owned it, because in every way that mattered, he did. He was the most powerful figure in Luzerne County, Pennsylvania. Parents called him firm, but fair. Lawyers called him impossible to read. The community called him honorable. He accepted all of it. He smiled at church on Sundays. He shook hands at town events. He gave speeches about justice and accountability to auditoriums full of people who believed every word. And then on Monday morning, he put his robes on, walked into his courtroom, and destroyed another child's life for money. In 2003, a 14-year-old boy named Hillary Tranzu appeared before Judge Chiavarella. Her offense: she had made a fake MySpace page mocking her school's assistant principal. It was a joke, a stupid teenage joke that got 3 complaints and went nowhere. She had no prior record. She had never been in trouble. She came from a good family who sat behind her in that courtroom believing, the way you believe in gravity, that she would walk out with them. Judge Chiavarella looked at her file for less than a minute. He didn't ask her a single question. He didn't acknowledge her parents. He simply looked up and sentenced her to 3 months in a juvenile detention facility. Her mother made a sound that everyone in that courtroom remembered for years. Hillary was taken away in handcuffs. She was 14 years old, and she had no idea that the judge who just destroyed her life had been paid to do it. The businessman's name was Robert Powell, and he had a problem. He had just built a brand new private juvenile detention facility in Luzerne County, and it was half empty. Private detention centers are a business. They get paid per child, per day, by the county. No children means no money. So Powell did what certain kinds of men do when the law stands between them and profit. He found the man who controlled the law, and he made him an offer. Between 2003 and 2008, Powell paid Judge Chiavarella and his colleague, Judge Michael Conahan, a total of $2.6 million in cash, transferred through shell companies, hidden in renovation contracts, disguised as consulting fees. In exchange, Chiavarella would fill those cells with children as fast as he possibly could. The cases came one after another. A 15-year-old boy caught shoplifting a $5 DVD, sentenced to 6 months. A 13-year-old girl who got into a schoolyard fight, sentenced to placement. A 17-year-old who wrote a note threatening a classmate as a prank, never delivered it, sentenced to residential confinement. The hearings lasted an average of 90 seconds. 90 seconds to take a child's freedom. Most of them had no lawyers. Chiavarella had quietly eliminated the right to counsel in his courtroom, telling children and parents it would go better for them without one. And because he was the judge, because he wore the robes and sat at the high bench and spoke with absolute authority, they believed him every single time. The investigation began almost by accident. A routine audit of county finances in 2008 flagged a series of payments that didn't connect to any legitimate contract. The file landed on the desk of state investigator Sandra Blake. Sandra had spent 19 years investigating financial fraud. She told her supervisor later that within 3 hours of opening that file, her hands started shaking, not from fear, from the recognition of something she had never seen on this scale. The payments traced back through 4 shell companies, 2 offshore accounts, and a construction firm that had done no actual construction. At the end of every trail was the same name: Richard Chiavarella, Juvenile Court Judge, Luzerne County, Pennsylvania. Sandra pinned his photo to the board at 11 p.m. She didn't go home until morning. Federal agents entered Luzerne County Courthouse on a Tuesday morning in January 2009. Judge Chiavarella was in his chambers preparing for the day's hearings. He had 14 cases scheduled. He never made it to the bench. When Sandra Blake sat across from him in that interrogation room, she placed a single folder on the table. Inside were 317 names. Children, each one sentenced by Chiavarella during the years the payments were made. She slid the folder across to him and watched his face. He looked at it for a long moment. Then he looked up at her, and he said, "I want to speak to my attorney." Sandra later said that in that moment, she thought about every child on that list, every single one, and how none of them had been given the same courtesy he was now demanding for himself. The trial of Richard Chiavarella drew families from across the county, people who had never spoken publicly before, who had carried what happened to their children in silence for years. Hillary Transu, now 19, took the stand. She was no longer the 14-year-old girl who had stood in that courtroom confused and terrified. She sat in that witness chair and she described what 3 months in detention had done to her. The nightmares, the anxiety that still hadn't fully left, the way she had stopped trusting authority figures in any form, the way her parents had looked at her through the facility glass. Unable to do anything. She spoke for 40 minutes. Chiavarella did not look at her once, not once, and that was perhaps the most honest thing he did during the entire trial. In the weeks following the arrest, Sandra Blake worked with the Pennsylvania Supreme Court to review every juvenile case Chiavarella had presided over. The number was staggering. Over 4,000 cases, spanning 14 years. The court vacated the convictions of more than 4,000 juvenile defendants, 4,000 children, who had been convicted in a courtroom where the judge was being paid to find them guilty. For some of them, the record expungement came too late. One boy, sentenced at 15 for a minor drug offense, had died by suicide while in detention. His mother testified that he had never understood why the judge had been so harsh. He had believed he deserved it. He had died believing that. Sandra sat alone in her office that evening and read his file from beginning to end. Then she closed it and sat in the dark for a long time. Some numbers are too large to feel all at once, so you start with one. Richard Chiavarella was convicted on 12 of the 18 counts against him: racketeering, conspiracy, money laundering, tax evasion. The jury deliberated for 2 days. When the verdict was read, Chiavarella showed no emotion, not a flinch, not a breath. He was sentenced to 28 years in federal prison. He will be in his 90s before he is eligible for release. As he was led from the courtroom, past the gallery where those families sat, he did not look at them the same way he had never looked at their children when he sentenced them. The courtroom was silent as he walked out, and then, slowly, someone began to cry, and then someone else, and then the whole room let out something it had been holding for a very long time. Richard Chiavarella is currently serving his sentence at a federal correctional institution Robert Powell received a lesser sentence in exchange for his cooperation. He served less than 4 years. The private detention facility he built, PA Childcare, was closed. Sandra Blake retired from the state attorney's office 3 years after the trial. She declined every interview request. She gave one statement. It was 4 sentences long. It said, "The justice system failed these children. We have a responsibility to make sure it cannot happen this way again. That work is not finished. It may never be finished." Hillary Transzoo became a social worker. She works with at-risk youth in Luzerne County, the same county where she was sentenced at 14 years old for a joke on the internet. She has never spoken publicly about why she chose that work. She doesn't need to. The courtroom where Ciavarella held his power for 14 years still stands. The bench is still there. The gavel is still there. But the name on the door is different now. And every judge who walks in knows exactly what happened the last time someone forgot that a courtroom belongs to justice, not to the man sitting highest in it.